people. When we start talking about how do you protect information from falling into the wrong hands, that's what I'm all about. And I actually take a very positive spin on it. I see this is one of the areas where technology is absolutely amazing and enabling, and we're just beginning to understand what we can do with it, and security becomes an enabler and a freeing of being able to share, as opposed to the old view to security, which is lock it down and hide things away.
Thanks, very good. Because and that's why security is part of this whole innovation lab, if you will, because historically security has been a reason not to innovate. And I love the thing you actually, to quote, security is an enabler. Very, very nice. And Michael.
Thanks. Mike McSally with Tech Systems. I've been in the human capital side of things for going on 20 years. And as far as security goes, I look at it two ways. One, through an operations lens, which I'm responsible for at Tech Systems. We have about 2,000 internal employees that have access to data to the outside world. There's about 20,000 consultants that we have, and there's a lot of data that needs to stay close to the vest. And then also we have about 8,000 internal employees, and when it comes to payroll and HR issues, performance management systems that are online, that is something that I'm involved with our IT group as well.
Super, thank you, Mike. And Louis.
Hi, I'm Louis Gutierrez. I'm with a consulting firm, Exeter Group Incorporated, but most of my professional life and currently my consulting work is with government and healthcare clients. I was the CIO for Governors Weld and Romney, CIO for Health and Human Services under both administrations. I do every job twice because by the second time you get the swing of it. And have spent some time at the Federal Reserve. And in security, I've had the opportunity to be exposed to some of the really interesting security questions of the time. Massachusetts in the early 90s was a leading innovator in e-commerce at a state level, digital signatures, first state to go online with credit card transactions. At the Fed, encryption, DES to triple DES to AES, those were hot topics, and what does it mean for how we're communicating. Real ID, the big policy questions now about real ID, biosurveillance, security writ large. But I'm a consumer of the expertise of others. I mean, I lean heavily on my general counsel, on my chief architect, on my chief security person. The thing that I think is really interesting these days with the cloud computing kind of movement is that there really is a kind of revivification of security issues that the business side of the operation really needs to think hard about. And I think in that sense, whatever the spread of cloud computing, it'll do a lot for improving the nature of the security discussion within enterprises.
Chaudhry, does this work? It is, okay. A co-founder and CEO of a Web 2.0 enterprise startup at present. Prior to that, I ran a company for creating trusted computing software stacks. Because if you think you trust software, you really don't understand it until you look inside a Cisco router that's been corrupted, and it doesn't run the software that you thought it was running anymore. We can talk about that. And then prior to that, a longtime CIO for Bankers Trust, JP Morgan, and Citigroup, where a lot of people talk about the financial industry being sort of deregulated. And I can tell you, it is one of the most highly regulated industries in the world. And most of the regulation occurred in the last 15 years, and a lot of that happened in security. And so as users of security, I had the privilege of explaining to large numbers of people that security was not a technology issue, that security is a business issue. And one of the big innovations we made at Citi was actually moving the security function from the CIO's office to its own independent control function that was a peer of the CIO, which was one of these big transformative things. But of course, I can all kinds of scars and stories about that as well.
Professor Dennis.
I'm Dennis Still, and I'm not a professor. I don't even play one on TV. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer at Brandeis University. Been in IT for almost 40 years now. First encountered security in about 1973 who was a database administrator, and you might know him. There was a fellow at IBM called Bob Courtney, who was kind of their senior security person back then. And I was just a young Turk out of college. And he said, security is the prevention of accidental or intentional disclosure, modification, or destruction of information by unauthorized parties. Notice how that hasn't changed in a very, very long time. Fast forward to 1988. I had started working for a big chemical pharmaceutical company. In the mid-'80s, I went to Harvard University. I was director of administrative computing for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. In 1988, the Morris worm hit. Okay, first time I'd encountered malware. At that point, it was the ARPANET. We were doing IP-based computing in the whole world. There were about 80,000 hosts. And that day, all of our Sun boxes, the CPUs pegged at 100% utilization, and nobody knew what to do, so we pulled the plug. In the process of doing that, we lost all the methods of communicating with the other people that were on the ARPANET to figure out what happened. So after that, if you've ever heard of CERT at Carnegie Mellon, the Computer Emergency Response Team, that was when all that stuff came into existence. And if you think of it, in those days, there were no demarcations between people or devices other than routers. There were no firewalls, there were no proxies, there were no, hardened perimeters, because the purpose of the ARPANET was to share information. Fast forward to about 2000, and I was working for a competitor to Pearson, the Thomson Corporation, and I was asked to start as a project forming a security office for Thomson. And I had to present to the board of directors and lots of other people, which technologists have a real hard time kind of relating. You talk about, business value. And as security people often do, you steal ideas and metaphors from other people. And some people that Thornton and I both know, somebody, and it's attributed to different people, but came up with this metaphor saying, security is like the brakes on your car. The function is to slow you down, but the purpose is to let you go fast. And I use that again and again with developers, with business owners. Thomson was very federated and had lots of strategic business units. But getting with CEOs, saying if we make each of the components that we produce secure, then we can be very facile in recombining them and responding to market needs and so forth. And you really need to get into the heads of business people and try to make the stuff that you're doing relevant. Now I'm back in higher ed at Brandeis, and it's the exact same issue. How do you get a faculty member to understand why it matters when we talk about this stuff? And how do you get a student? Okay, I mean, we were talking before about putting things out on the internet. We have a curriculum we call digital self-defense for our students. And the mantra that we use with them is we say, when you put information out on the internet, it's like getting a tattoo. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it, but it's going to be there for a very, very long time. So, think about what this is. And I can go on and on. We'll have lots of lively discussions, I'm sure, but I'm delighted to be here, and, thank you for your attention.
Would this be a good time to share your visual aid?
This might be a good time for a visual aid.
Wait, I'll do the Vanna thing.
Okay. Okay. Usually when people talk about security, they tell you... I'm really... I'm really glad he did that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Usually when we talk about security, and I try to think of this, especially for the young engineers that are here. What's the definition of security? I propose that it's when a system, and a system can be a person, a process, a computer system, a piece of software, whatever, does exactly what it was designed to do and nothing more. Okay, and we can have a debate about this because there are a lot of hackers in the room that love to find undocumented features in things. Okay, so do the black hat hackers, right? If this circle is the specification for what something is supposed to do, and the other circle is after you test it, and I don't know if Michael Schrag is here, but he was talking a lot about testing and iterating. If this is what it actually does, we take the specification, we test all the items on the specification, we do feature testing, and we identify all the features that are missing. We have use cases. Okay, and that's what the software, doesn't do, but it should do. And we stop. And that's when the hacking community starts. And they say, what are the things the software does or the person does that they shouldn't do? Okay, if we have a procedure for getting into the building with a mag stripe card, and Amal lets me tailgate and walk behind him, that's something the system shouldn't do, and it defeats the entire system. Okay, and whether it's social engineering, hacking, buffer overflows, stack overflows, heap overflows, directory traversal attacks, SQL script injections, all of those things are instances of a system doing something that it's not supposed to do. And if the thing was done in a quality way to begin with, that vulnerability wouldn't exist. So.
Super.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Now Amal, during our conversation in preparing for the session. Open it up to the audience for conversation.
Yeah, the discussion, actually, Dennis and I were having this discussion, was we have three structural problems in the business today, right? And it starts with, if you think about education of developers, right? Developers are taught pretty early on. I don't know what happened at Olin, but certainly taught pretty on about functionality. And functionality is limited to typically, what value does it add to the end user, right? But the fact of the matter is functionality is much broader than that. There's operational functionality. If you build any kind of large system, people actually have to be able to run it. And in most cases, that actually outweighs, the cost of that outweighs what you actually deliver to the end user. But there's also security functionality. And part of that is really educating developers as part of the creative process to factor these things into the original design, right? So that's one area that we tend to be weak on. The second that we talked about was really, the two and three are fairly related. The industry as a whole, largely because of the type of funding models that the so-called startup companies go through, right, has been constrained by a venture capital model that says, you kind of have to have a product that's small enough to build quickly. It has to be, you kind of need to have 3 customers we can already talk to, right? And it needs to plug some kind of gap in the market, which is typically some, underthought hole in the Cisco environment or in somebody's login environment or in, Microsoft's rich and open environment, right? And so what ends up happening is you end up with a level of, quote, innovation, unquote, that is very, very narrow in terms of the problem that it goes after, right? Which leads to the third problem, which is, as a user of these technologies, you're now faced with integrating 10,000, 20,000 products that, with your own skill set, that you may not be capable of doing because it's no longer human scale, right? So we actually have a structural problem in the business that we need to get through.
Now
I'm a 30-yard wide, half-inch deep kind of security guy. But as an economics and business CIO, the way I try to think of it is minimizing deadweight loss. There is a deadweight loss to the security that we invest in that has no practical bearing on outcomes. And so you try to do the risk-return trade-offs in the most intelligent way possible, but you recognize that this is an easy place to overinvest in by the unsophisticated user.
Okay, yes, sir. And please identify yourself. Sir.
Well, if you think about it, the traditional model of security was the kind of Maginot Line model, that somehow you could put a border around things and it was safe inside and dangerous outside. I submit to you there is no perimeter anymore with the Internet. I mean, the number of devices in this room that are connecting across either their network or a cellular network to countless different places, we have almost no control over. So this device is a perimeter. Each of us as a person, each of us as an end user, the university, students, faculty, staff, they are a perimeter. In fact, in honor of Thornton and his new book, if we talk about hardware, software, firmware, we can call people nowhere, K-N-O-W. I figured he would like it. He won't give me credit for it, I'm sure, in the future. But
Very small print, though.
Very small print, like usual. But with all social engineering attacks and everything, I mean, look at all the phishing that you have at a bank. So when we talk about security being people, process, and technology, there's not a lot we can do with technology to address that. It's really people and process. So we're exposing devices, we're exposing people. The third thing we're exposing is business processes. And the business processes themselves are things that people are trying to attack. And then the fourth thing that we're exposing is the data. And the data is the thing that's regulated. And in answer to Bill's question before, when you talk about where do you make the investment, well, remember what Willie Sutton said, I rob banks because that's where the money is? The hacking community is a criminal community now, and they're after regulated information. Massachusetts came up with Chapter 39H, 93H, the new breach law and the regulations with it, 201 CMR 17, and they basically define the kind of information that you're a custodian of that you need to protect. And that's where you should be making your investment. So what we're trying to do on campus, the same thing I was trying to do at Thompson, is get rid of all the information that we don't need. Okay, somebody asked the question before about life cycle of information when it was outsourced, and does it actually get deleted? Well, forget about it in the cloud. We don't delete it in our own organizations. I mean, universities are like pack rats. Large corporations are like pack rats. I mean, they hoard the stuff and amass the stuff to do data mining, and you really need to look critically at every one of the processes and say, do we need this information? Do we have the right to really keep it and be responsible custodians for it?
Dennis, your remarks raised an important point, is that people say, well, the cloud is, and very gently sort of mentions it's like, it's not secure now. We're not stepping up to that, but it's not secure now. But sorry to interrupt. Now, Carl, you wanted to jump in.
I just wanted to comment on the people, process, and technology. I totally agree with, but I think, and maybe you were saying this, that people haven't changed and they probably never will. Processes change, but that's slow. But the technology has changed quite a bit. And when we talk about perimeters, I think perimeters do exist, and there's technology out there now that says the perimeter can be around the individual piece of content, and it becomes self-regulating. Now, obviously, compliance officers, general counsel have to get involved in teaching the software what it should be aware of. But now the content is self-aware and says, well, who is asking for me right now? So there's identity management going on. Who is this person? Where do they live? What rights are conferred on them right now based on their physical location? Are they coming at me through a mobile device, or are they sitting with a hardwired device in their secure office? What is the nature of this content? What are the current policies and procedures on releasing this content to this person at this time? Therefore, we let it go. 10 seconds later, that policy can change and the access goes away with it. So I think there's a lot changing in technology that if we start thinking more creatively about it, things can change. And there's a very concrete example. This is going on right now with mergers and acquisitions attorneys. When they are forced to start sharing content with a potential acquisition, or even e-discovery, this is going on right now. I am forced to share my legal records with an opposing counsel. As the case unfolds, gets dropped, settled out of court, in the old days, I shared this content with you. I hope you give it back to me. You are under an obligation. This is, relying on the people again. You are under a moral obligation, an ethical obligation to shred that information. Now I can say, no, I gave that access to you. I'm taking it away now. And in the interim, I prohibited you from printing it, emailing, attaching it, giving it to anyone else.
If I could put Larry Scott, the CEO of Nest, basically on this, basically, I'm going to call you out. So, like, Larry, now you've been at Cambridge Technology Partners. You were in charge of financial services. At Sun, you were in charge of their whole, that whole.
put my money at home, right? I'll put my money at home. I'll build my security systems, as opposed to, you know, let me trust a bank with my money. Now, I'm interested. What is the opportunity, if you guys see opportunity, to your analogy, to have the business run faster by adopting adopting cloud, so you don't go through multiple thousands of on-site solutions that aren't fully baked, that you need to learn how to secure, which is tough.
Let's just start by answering that with a small poll. How many of you in the last 5 years have gotten a letter from your bank, credit card company that says they lost something and they're going to pay for their, pay for your credit protection? Well, it's about half, right? That's how good enterprise security is today. All right, so, and the other 50% that didn't get it will get one soon. Okay, it just hasn't happened yet, or they haven't figured it out, right? No, but my point is, I think this whole
because the money's gone. So
yeah, no, but I think the notion of security in the cloud is actually a red herring, because I run a Web 2.0 startup. We are more secure in the cloud than any of my environments ever were in the big banks. Okay, because our file system's encrypted, the wire is encrypted, the connection between the browser and the individual is encrypted. Our ID mechanisms are better. We have two-factor authentication. You couldn't put these things into an enterprise. The largest enterprises in the world don't do that today. Right?
Say that again, because this is an important fact, and I don't think people understand it. Say that.
The whole thing all over?
No. The first sentence. No. The idea that we are more secure in the cloud.
We are absolutely. It's all about the model. And Dennis and I were talking about this the other day, which is it starts with a design objective. If your design objective, and this goes back to developers and systems designers, okay? I mean, it goes back to the core technical skill sets of people designing these things, okay? If your core designers and implementers understand the notion of security as a feature, right? It's not optional. It's not an afterthought. It's a feature. And it's a feature that has exactly the same rank as, the coolest, Ajax thing you're going to do, on the browser, right? It has exactly the same rank, right? What happens is magic happens. Because as you think this through from a holistic perspective, and the key word is holistic, you design in security that is, almost unbreakable, because it's built into the very thought process as the applications are put together, as systems are put together, right? And so the cloud stuff, done properly, I'm not saying anything in the cloud is done properly, it's simply an enabling technology, right? But the cloud itself does not create a security weakness, right?
So I really good. We wanted to provoke the crowd, and we succeeded. So the gentleman from Pearson, sir, your response and comment.
Actually, I agree. In one way I agree, in the technical way I agree, and in the human behavioral standpoint, I'm not sure I agree. Not that I disagree, but
spoken like a consultant.
I'll be charging for this advice momentarily. What we found very interesting was that we've been in the worst security model in the world, which is a textbook, which is create a device that can be used for a short period of time and then live forever, and you have no control over it. So that's like the worst security that we could possibly have. And then we've moved from that to essentially being a software as a service provider of all of our online content, especially our homework systems. And we make a lot more money, frankly, by controlling our IP and getting rid of the aftermarket. So there's a huge incentive for us to do that. At the same time, one of the features of the cloud is that it's not just about the browser. It's about ubiquity and availability. So you end up with people who have a belief that goes beyond the constraints of what the cloud alone provides to if I just take this file on the cloud and I download it onto my USB, there's that little incremental behavioral thing that's totally out of resonance, out of sync with what you're describing, but the public hasn't kind of internalized the impedance mismatch between those things and the effects of that.
But I would argue that's a shortcoming in your thinking. Because I'll tell you something.
Oh, now the panel's getting the panel is heckling the audience. Whoa, Smackdown! Watch out, incoming.
Yeah, because I subscribe. There's a company out there called Pragmatic Publishing or something like Pragmatic Programmers. Forget what they're called. But when I buy a book from them, $40 ebook, right? It's encoded with my name on the header and the footer, okay, of every single page. But they give it to me in 3 formats: a PDF, an EPUB, and whatever the Kindle uses, .mobi, right? No problem putting it on a USB stick. But God help me if I lend that to somebody, because all of a sudden, right, my ability to dodge that bullet is zero. I would argue the publishing industry needs to rethink the model. Right?
Nice, super. Good. Now we had some more questions. Here we go. Yes, sir. Oh, please introduce yourself. We haven't done that yet.
Bob Withrow, previously from Nortel. Of course, there's a lot of that going around. But so it's interesting that you highlighted 128-bit encryption and encrypted file systems. And the point is that you close some easy holes. That's right. But attackers attack the weakest link. And right now, I think that the weakest link is identity, or the projection of identity. We carry around a phone, it's got identity. We got a pocket full of credit cards, that's identity. There's identity in so many different forms. What are we going to do? Why can't I just have one form of identity, and I only project the parts of it that are necessary for whatever transaction I'm doing? If I come into a door, it doesn't have to know my social security number, does it? It just needs to know I have a right to go through that door.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think the first part of that is the education part. You know, education teaches why, teaching teaches how, whatever. And this digital self-defense curriculum I was talking about, we teach students, if you go into a foot doctor and the first thing they ask you for is your social security number, that doesn't mean you have to give it to them. You know, just because somebody asks you for something, that doesn't mean that you have to provide it. So
What do I do with my credit card then? I put my credit card in the gas pump.
Right.
It knows a lot more about me than just I want to buy some gas and I can do it.
Right. Okay, well, that's the second thing. Privacy is, we know what security is. It's prevention of, it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Privacy is giving you control over how your personal information is used. Okay? And that's your relationship with that particular credit card company. And unfortunately, most of us don't have all the control that we would like over that. But look at all of the agreements that you make. Bruce Schneier says most people would give up a DNA sample for 2 cheeseburgers. You know, we give up personal information all the time. You know, your CVS convenience card, or your you know, to get a discount thing. We give up that information all the time, and then we bemoan the fact that all that information is out there. The narcissistic kids on Facebook and tweet and all that are constantly putting information out there. It's going to take a colossal disaster before people start being mindful about not sharing that.
I agree with you. So how the hell are you going to provide security then? In that environment, how do you provide security?
You have security.
Right.
You can clearly provide security in a variety of different ways, but I want to go back to something else you said earlier. And the idea that you swipe your credit card at the gas station and there's much more there than the fact that I need to buy gas right now. Can I cover the cost? Everyone seems to think so negative about security. Now, it's all based in software. No human saw that information. Processes and technologies saw it. Now, hear me out for a second. Now, what if it was used for your betterment? Start thinking of it that way. Now, in a very secure, closed system, it's saying, this is Bob. He's standing here right now. He's getting gas. We happen to know that he is a frequent buyer of X. X is on sale inside right now. Why don't we flash that on a screen to him and only him right now? This is the way we want to start thinking about it, is I'm not providing access to humans to everything there is to know about me. I'm putting it into closed systems that perhaps can help me. Now let me give you a real world example that had a significant impact on a defense contractor I had worked with, and I was there to help them do knowledge management. They really wanted to start collaborating more, but when you're working in a defense contracting environment, security is number one for so many different reasons. One of them being, you and I work in the same company, different contracts. We are not allowed to talk about what we're doing. I'm working on a defense system. You can't even know the government's funding right now. Right? That immediately created a wall that said, well, you and I will probably never talk because I don't even know who you are and what you're doing. We took what the systems knew about individuals and stored it in software that very, very, very few people had access to actually start reading. But when I encountered a problem, it would throw it out into the system and say, is there anybody in this company that has seen something similar to this, has dealt with something similar to this? And it might pop up your name and your phone number or where you sit. I now had enough intelligence to say, hey, Bob, you don't know me, and I can't tell you why I need to know this. But I just found that X, Y, and Z, when you combine them, they blow up. Have you ever seen something like that? You could then say to me, well, I can't tell you how I discovered it, but yes, I did, and here's how we handled it. So it became a real enabler without breaking down the walls. They were still highly compliant. You didn't know a thing about my project other than what you could know about
We
it.
have reached a fascinating moment. You know we're at a school of engineering when we basically say you can trust machines more than you can trust humans, and Skynet has become aware. I mean, no, it's very, very interesting because these are the society. I mean, these are broader societal issues. I mean, because everything is automatable, and then with the Twitters and all this other type of thing, what we've done is we've rendered this stuff into machine-readable form, which means that it's analyzable, understandable, and you can actually create algorithms which incent or prevent behaviors. For example, we could have migrated that. Any final comments before we move to our next panel? We just wanted to stimulate the group here.
Yeah, one closing comment. If you ever want to get a sense of what your footprint is out in cyberspace, go to a website called people.com, PIPL.com, and put in your name and your town, and you will be absolutely amazed how much public information is already out there. Yeah.
We're just going to spike. Your server just went down there.
Are we going in order?
No, just...
All right, my final is, because I was fascinating listening to the panel before this on cloud computing, I think there's a huge opportunity. It's, just right over the horizon where we are going to turn to cloud computing for this issue of information security. It's ridiculous to think that each corporation needs to create their own core competency on how to secure content. There are going to be people who do that as their lifeblood, and they're going to start providing that kind of service to your online content. And yes, they will go into court with you when things go wrong.
I haven't said much. I'm not a security guy. I mentioned that out of the gates. One of the things we are seeing from a demand standpoint and all the research we do when it comes to human capital, obviously everyone sitting in here sees the need to attract younger generations into the line of work. And the research that we continue to see, the demand that we continue to see even during a recession, is security related. The two things that have kept a staff augmentation and services firm alive have been the skill sets in security around healthcare and around government over the last 18 months. Research we continue to do as things evolve tell us there will be a 30% increase in that skill set. So I know there are a lot of young generations out there debating whether they should enter into the IT field or not, and they're not sure that they, quote unquote, I believe, want to sit in a cube and take on phone calls or answer help desk questions. And there's positions now that we see evolving that weren't out there 3, 5, 6 years ago, and they will continue to evolve. So if there's anything we can do to give them a push into the IT field, we think security is a big way to go.
All right, Luke, final remarks?
Just a thought on cloud computing, reflecting a discussion at our table earlier. I think there's a certain asymmetry of power that right now, how often as an individual do you look at a shrink wrap license and say, no, I don't agree with those terms. I'd like a renegotiation. For small, mid-sized businesses, for consumers, just no question, you're going to go cloud direction and you're going to be the taker of the terms. As you get to the very large organizations, whether government or corporate, there will be intense interest in specific negotiation of many elements of the security features of the cloud service. And people are going to need to think about how to standardize that, because it's going to be the antithesis of cloud services to do individual contracts for individual customers. So how do you really standardize the service offering top to bottom for certain vertical clienteles so that you can really provide a uniform security acceptable to large clients in cloud?
One last comment. Listening to virtualization and cloud computing and social networks and so forth brought to mind, especially for the young people, always remember, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And every time a new technology comes out, we have this same discussion. I mean, I've heard this discussion for decades. There's an appropriate use for almost each one of these technologies. Most technologies don't go away. I mean, we still have mainframes. We call them something different. And in making those decisions, remember this other expression that a mentor of mine used some years ago. He said, Disney doesn't outsource the theme parks. Right, so if you think of what your core competency is and what differentiates you as a business, hold on to that, and all the other stuff that's utility, put it where it's most cost effective.
And Amal, you closing remarks?
The only, just addressing Bob's issue of the easy stuff, I think there's a lot of easy stuff that's wide open out there today. And they just need to be closed. I mean, it's basic blocking and tackling around security, because it's ultimately common sense, right? You can analyze it till, it becomes an NP incomplete problem, but it's just common sense. Just look at the holes, close them, move on, because there'll be something to do tomorrow.
There you go. Good job. Round